And welcome Rich Sheridan to Marquette, Michigan.
Great
again.
To be here.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
Thank you for taking a little time to stop by with us down here at Campfire Coworks for this Startup Grind Marquette event. It's a fireside chat with Rich Sheridan, founder of Menlo Innovations. And what we thought we would do today is just have a very informal conversation. We know that tonight at the Econ Club, you're going to be giving a pitch. So last minute takers of that, I think you might still be able to get a slot at the event this evening. We appreciate you making some time on your agenda to meet the community. We've got some folks here in person, and also this is a hybrid event, so we've got some participants online.
Like all events.
Yep. So exactly. So I mean, like I could give the whole introduction, but let me just start with Rich. You and I met a couple of years ago at an event downstate, and I found at the Henry Ford Museum, and I was really inspired and refreshed to meet you and to find that you were as approachable as you are. You have made yourself available to our community on a number of different occasions, and I appreciate that. We all do, because you've got, I know, a lot on your plate. You're running a complex enterprise. You've put out a few books now. And so it means a lot when a person of your success and busy agenda will take some time out for those of us who are just getting started. So why don't we start with a little bit of so let me do the formal background. I'm going to read this because it was composed for me, but it's a little bit of an introduction that Rich started as a kid programmer in the 70s and has gone from that kid programmer to a Forbes cover story in 2003. He's the author of a book called Joy Incorporated, also Chief Joy Officer. It was your second book, right? Never really shied away from challenges or opportunities or the limelight, as they say. And while his focus has always been around technology, really, Rich's passion is about process, teamwork, organizational design, and has one really succinct goal in all of that, right? And that is joy, which I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. Tonight at the Econ Club, I'm sure you'll talk a bit more in depth about the joy background, but we're really interested today in, among other things, how you have applied those organizational concepts through a very difficult time with COVID, and all of the impacts that had. And of course, all of us being startup founders or members of small businesses experienced that firsthand in our own way too. So.
Sure.
Rich, maybe with that as an introduction, you could start with the beginning of how you even got started in the business world, and then I know you'll take it from there. I'll prompt questions if it becomes necessary.
Yeah, well, I touched a computer for the first time when I was 13 years old, way back in 1971. I know for some of you, it might seem impossible to believe there were actually computers back in 1971. They were a little different than they are today. And I just turned out, and I think one of the things that brings you and I together, Keith, is innovation. And this is a great state for innovation. It always has been. Macomb County Schools, where I grew up, just north of Detroit, was one of the first 3 counties in the nation to offer computer science at the high school level. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Touched a computer, typed in a 2-line program, typed run, said, "Hi, Rich," because that's what I told it to do, and I was hooked. I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my days. By my junior year, I had won an international programming contest by typing in all of the Major League Baseball players into the computer so my friends and I could play baseball against each other in the cold Michigan winter months. So you're looking at the guy who, probably invented fantasy baseball, but that's just the truth of entrepreneurship. Is a lot of lost opportunities that go by when you just thought you were having fun. But that contest win got me a job as a programmer before I could even drive a car, working at the Macomb Intermediate School District, and created the first email system that Macomb County schools would ever see. Email as a term wouldn't be invented for another decade. And, what followed, including a degree from the University of Michigan, was what looked like a perfect career. Raises, promotions, stock options, this wonderful upward trajectory that made my parents very proud, my wife very happy with the life I was providing. But the trouble was my heart was breaking for a profession I thought would carry me for a lifetime. And I'll tell this story tonight because I think it resonates with the crowd up in the UP. I was literally thinking of abandoning the tech field and starting a canoe camp in the boundary waters of Minnesota. So that's how far away from technology I wanted to get. And so, you know, I think my story, probably like a lot of ultimately entrepreneurial stories, is one of hopes and dreams and this kind of crushing reality of watching an industry that I thought would carry my family for a lifetime just wrecking my psyche. So instead of leaving and doing the plan B to the canoe camp, I decided to stay and change the industry. And that is much of my life story now, culminating in the company I founded in 2001 called Menlo Innovations. And it is very different. It's a very different kind of place with a big mission: end human suffering in the world as it relates to technology. There's plenty of it out there, and returning joy to what we believed is one of the most unique endeavors that mankind has ever undertaken, the invention of software. And for those who are not in the software business, it might be surprising to learn that software is often a very joyless profession, very lonely, very isolating, lots of blown deadlines, missed budgets, quality problems, all that sort of thing. And I just didn't want that for me. And so I took a very, very different route, and so different now that 3,000 to 4,000 people a year travel from all over the world just to see how we do what we do. And of course, like everybody else, things got dramatically different in COVID times. We work in one big open room. We work 2 to a computer. All work is done in pairs, 2 people, 1 keyboard and mouse. The pairs switch every 5 days. And so a lot of human energy in the room. And of course, that fateful week of March 16th of 2020, that all had to end suddenly and dramatically and shift to a work from home environment when this team was used to being like shoulder to shoulder collaborative for the first 18 and a half years of Menlo. We celebrated our 20th birthday last June, which I think for any business, if you celebrate a 20th birthday, feels like a big deal. This particular 20th birthday felt like a huge deal. It's like, we made it.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That is a big deal. That is a big deal. Actually, we've just celebrated our 2nd anniversary here, and that's a pretty big deal for us as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you mentioned
And, you know, given the 2nd anniversary occurred in 2020 and 2021, in a space where you're putting people together in the same room.
We'll take it. You know,
exactly.
There were many times when we didn't think we would be here today, and we're very glad that we are. I just wanted to pull on one thread there about you saw yourself, the joy in yourself becoming extinguished. You wanted to change the industry. That's a pretty big, audacious thing to try and do. How did that go?
Well, you know, if we compare and contrast, so my career is roughly split now between, call it the 20 years before Menlo and now the 20 years of Menlo, right? A pretty even split. And if we just look at my life, and, you know, and I will admit, probably is true for most entrepreneurs, there's a part of entrepreneurship that is often a personally very selfish journey. And for me, the selfish part was I wanted to create a workplace that I wanted to work in every day. You know, and of course, you can't do things alone, so you have to convince others to work alongside of you. And so if we look at the first 20 years, my life was riddled with emergencies, software emergencies, you know, firefighting, phones ringing off the hook with problems, customers constantly complaining. You know, if you've ever been frustrated with a piece of software and you look at it and you're like, why does it work like this? Did they ever talk to the people who actually use it? And the answer is probably not. So I would say I had multiple firefights a week in my old life. In the last 20 years, we have had 2 software emergencies in 20 years. And so I would have never guessed that kind of effect was possible. If you had asked me 20 years ago, what's your dream for Menlo, I might have thought, if we could get down to like one emergency a week, I would be thrilled. And if somebody suggested, how about one a month or one a quarter or one a year, I like, no, there's no way. This is software. And the fact that we've only had 2 significant software emergencies in 20 years is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's unheard of in software.
Yeah, I know you. You come out of that world. You know what software is like, and it's and it and I guess in some ways now we are living, breathing proof that things can be better.
So it sounds like the answer is it's going well, at least within Menlo. So that is a big problem that you sought to solve. And a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we start out with a pretty big problem. And then we start to realize there's no way in hell I can solve that problem, right? Because you can't solve the whole industry.
Yourself, right? Yeah.
But so how did you find yourself going from that big idea to a manageably small idea that was still big enough for you? And do so as successfully as you have?
I think, if I look at Menlo, there's 2 big pieces of Menlo that fit really well together. We design and build software for a living. We have a team that, that can break up into smaller pieces and work for, we probably have about 15 active projects right now in just about every industry imaginable. Just to give you an example, at one end of the spectrum, we are helping a solo entrepreneur manage all of the data related to dog agility contests across the nation. So if you ever watch dogs run up little ramps and over hoops and everything, and if you're a dog person or dog people, they're a little bit crazy. And, especially the ones that do things, competitively. And so that team, our team has run that entrepreneurs software for the last 12 years or so. It's amazing how much work there is for keeping track of dogs. And at the other end of the spectrum, we just started our first project for NASA. And we will be creating the data analysis tools for a satellite that's going to launch in 2025. That's going to go out at what's called the Lagrange point between the Earth and the Sun. That satellite will sit there and feed data back from the solar energy that's coming off of the sun, and our team will provide the scientists, for decades, the tools they will use to analyze that.
Cool.
So you can see we work in a wide range of fields, and so we bring our direct work to help those customers. The indirect work, where we help others to, learn what we do, is we call that the experience part of Menlo. So we open our doors to the world. We write books, give talks, and people come and visit. They take classes from us, and they learn how we do what we do in the hopes that they might be able to take some part of our culture home with them. And so in that way, then, we don't have to do it all ourselves.
Yeah.
We can be teachers of others to show them how to do that for themselves.
So one of the things we all encounter as a startup founder, whether we were halfway through our career and happen to have a little bit of capital or whatever, is how do I pay for all of this, right? And it's interesting what you've accomplished, because part of your business model, you mentioned already, is 2 programmers to a computer, right?
Yes.
And so in my services mind, I'm going, okay, my service cost just doubled, right? And my customer is going to say, well, I'm not going to pay for 2 programmers to do one.
You've met my customers.
Exactly. So talk to us a little bit about that. It's easier if you bring things into a real pragmatic example, right? And so let's take the example of 2 programmers doubling my cost. I get that long term, it's going to take down your costs because you have less emergencies. From a personal standpoint, probably that's making it more joyful, more interactive, less crappy. But at the end of the day, we're all faced with the realities of the economy, right? The market.
Yep.
So how did you balance those 2 things? Because in that example, that's one where I go, how did he do it? How did he pull it off?
Yeah. Well, and let's also overlay that, because when we started in 2001, there was a declaration in most publications. You probably saw this kind of declaration back when you were at IBM, Keith, where there would never be a need for another programmer in the United States. All software work was going offshore. going overseas. It would be done by $5 an hour programmers and pick whatever favorite country it was going to be done in. And, parents were told, do not send your kids to computer science classes at major universities because there will never be another need. Can you imagine this, right? And literally, I'm on the advisory board for the for U of M's computer science engineering department, and you could see the graph. The enrollment in computer science between 2001 and about 2006 was plummeting. Now it is just soaring, right? So, don't ever trust the pundits, number one. So, what I was about to say was we're doing this not only with 2 programmers, 1 computer, 2 expensive American programmers in downtown Ann Arbor, just not the least expensive piece of real estate in the state of Michigan. And so, when people come in, they think it's cool, they're intrigued, but the potential customers suddenly look and say, wait a minute, do I have to pay for both of those people? Like, every minute they work in your project, you have to pay for them. And of course, then the questions come. Why would you do this? Why was it more effective? And so on. And, it is, I guess we figured out how to explain it because we're 20 years of growth and making it work. But you have to remind them sometimes of the challenges they have experienced in their own lives with software, right? The software industry fails more often than it succeeds. The number of failed software initiatives that happen where you set a team of people off to do something and 1 year, 5 years, 10 years later, nothing to show for it. And you start to look at the negative return on investment and all that. And so you get them intrigued. I would say that the people who are more likely to become a Menlo customer are people who have failed in the past on a software initiative. And they realize the scope of the cost of that failure. And then suddenly everything we do seems more sensible. And give you just a practical aspect. Most software teams are comprised of individual heroes who we call towers of knowledge, who know one part of one system and nobody else knows what they know. And then those people get really, really busy. The only way to scale a hero-based organization is overtime. And the hero starts working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, which is almost a tradition in the software industry. And the trouble is tired people make bad software. And so we didn't want to do that. So we never work overtime because if we need more done, we can add more people. One of the most difficult aspects of any team, software or otherwise, is how do you onboard new people? How do you get them to join the team? How do you get them on the train? How do you get them productive? How do you train them up? How do you share with them the knowledge, the specific knowledge they need to help you with whatever your endeavor is, right? They can come in with the right degree, the right training, the right background, knowledge of the right tools. But if they don't know what you're doing, how you're doing it, what your methods are, what your approach is, you will often, I used to say in my old managerial life, onboarding a new person was like a corporate hazing ritual, right? There would be like this 3-week to 3-month process where I was trying to get you productive before I demoralized you. And it was usually a race I lost. And then, I'd find them, pissing and moaning over by the water cooler. And I'd be like, why can't I find good people? Well, I found good people. I just demoralized them in the process. So imagine a paired environment. You join Menlo. Literally the minute you walk in the door, put you with a pair partner. Their job, put the keyboard under your hands, say, let's get going. Like, what do you mean, let's get going? I don't know the language, the technology, the tools, the domain. That's okay. I'll tell you what to do. Let's cut and paste this little piece of automated unit testing. Oh, cut and paste. I could do that. And so instantly, there's an upward trajectory of energy and spirit. Imagine how many people you lose in the hiring process, which, there's a talent shortage out there. We don't see it at Menlo. We've never seen it. We've hired 19 programmers in Ann Arbor since March of 2020 or March of 2021. So just in the last year, we've added 19 programmers to our team. Wow. I go around and people in my town and in my industry are like, Rich, we've been looking for one for a year and you've hired 19. Yep. Bring them on board, plug them in, boom, they're going. Within 2 weeks, they're productive. Within 6 weeks, they're able to mentor a new person coming on board. Not because they know everybody, but because every 5 days we're switching the pairs, so they know 6 people on my team. So when they struggle, when they forget something, they reach out to these other 6 and say, hey, I forgot how to do this. And so a lot of what we focus on is creating this culture of support and helpfulness and making your pair partner look good, supporting other human beings. And it becomes this really neat upward spiral of productivity, of human energy, of camaraderie.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you hit on that, because we see that happening even here in Campfire. Jasmine, you can't see her on the, she's off camera, but Jasmine, one of the co-founders here, is excellent at that, and has shown time and again that when somebody comes in the door and you say right away, oh, let's sit down. Hey, I need a website. Okay, sit down. Let me show you how to start using WordPress. And this is what Jasmine and the team at Campfire do. It's really engaging. Instead of making it this mysterious thing you have to train for the rest of your life before you can start,
yes,
you roll up your sleeves and you start.
Yeah.
And that maybe is the most encouraging thing in the world that you can do for anyone.
Absolutely.
Is just get them started on it, right?
Because you want to go home and you want to feel like you got something meaningful done today.
Yeah. And so in the beginning, was it always 2 programmers, 1 computer, or is there an iceberg story here where, yeah, that's a great thing, but it took a lot of slogging, a lot of faith, a lot of getting through failures, stops and starts to get to that point at which customers will accept extra cost or premium?
Yeah, I had a very wonderful start story, because my trough of disillusionment days were occurring inside of this tired old public company in Ann Arbor called Interface Systems. And, I was climbing the corporate ladder at Interface, and I eventually got to VP of R&D at Interface. And the whole way I'm like, plan B, canoe camp, get me out of here. There's got to be a better way. And so my first, all the tough trials of trial and failure and experimentation and trying to lead people a new way of working actually occurred at Interface Systems. And we got a prototype of Menlo working inside of Interface. We called it the Java Factory at Interface Systems. And it was, if you saw it on its last day and you saw Menlo today, you would say, oh, it's the same thing, almost the same kind of space and everything. And I went from trough of disillusionment to joy inside of a 2-year period inside of that tired old public company. And then 2001 hit, the internet bubble burst, and suddenly the California parent that had bought Interface shuttered every remote office they had, including mine. And so I lost everything save one thing. They couldn't take away what I learned. Couldn't take your idea and your
knowledge. Yeah.
And so Menlo started with all of these crazy practices already sort of proven out over 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it was a very, that said, we were starting in the midst of one of the biggest downturns in the IT industry.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that you probably are learning this too. Getting a startup going in a downturn is actually a really interesting time to start things.
Yeah. There's opportunity in chaos and in crisis.
Yeah. And things are ubiquitous and cheap or free.
Yeah.
Equipment was cheap, space was cheap, people were cheap. And so we had a lot of good components to start. And there were 4 founders. We wrote a $15,000 check in on day one, and that was it. We built the entire company.
That's great. Yeah. So it was a combination of some preparation that happened prior, laying some groundwork, probably some contacts and connections from a career well spent, the timing of an industry that allowed some cost saving, and a fair bit of luck.
Yes.
There's always a little bit. There's always a little bit of that smattered in there. So I like. We've got another developer here in the front row, Silas Talley. He heads up Ambitious Games, an indie game studio.
Nice.
And for 4 years now, right? I think 4 years he's been really focused, I think, on number one, building the game that he envisioned, but more so building a process and a community and a repeatable product development roadmap,
Nice.
a culture really.
Mhm.
And, of course, that comes at a cost of spending 4 years working at Jimmy John's, scraping things together, right? So building culture is expensive, right? I mean, if you're going to build a company that is based on a culture, the cost comes somewhere, right? You're either going to have to pass that cost on to your customers, or you're going to have to partner with people who value that, something, right? Did you find early on that it was essential to have a network of like-minded business partners?
Yes. So, I mean, part of it's just my own personal wiring. I personally, and I'm not saying there's a right way and a wrong way, because you can do entrepreneurship any possible way. So I'll just tell you my way, the way I did it. And so for me personally, I never wanted to be in business by myself. It just didn't interest me. I didn't feel I was personally complete enough to have all the thoughts I needed to have and so on. So I was, in some ways, as I was going through life, business life, I was curating the people I knew and making some kind of heartfelt evaluations about people I'd come in contact with. Would I want to go into business with this person? And I will simply say, and my wife gets very nervous when I say it like this, I think you should spend more time and effort picking your business partner than your spouse. Because you will have more legal entanglements with your business partner than you will with your spouse. And now my wife also works at Menlo, so but it's business is a complex operation, and there's lots of things to be thinking about all the time. And of course, every business is playing itself against the backdrop of the world, right? If you told me in 2001, hey, by the way, Rich, coming up to a theater near you is 9/11, two wars, 2008 financial crisis, 2016 financial crisis, a pandemic, the economic problems of the pandemic, and now another, the what feels like the verge of World War III.
Yep.
Are you sure you want to do this? I probably would have said, yeah, I think I'll take a pass and wait till all that stuff settles down. And of course, it never settles down. So you've
got to go through it anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So when it comes down to it, if you know that you got to that point, it sounds like you got to that point in your career where the dissonance you were experiencing inside of the corporate world was enough that, okay, I got to do this. I have to do this now.
Yeah. And for me, it was kind of a profound moment where I realized that the risk of staying the same crossed a bridge in my mind, and I realized the risk of staying the same was far greater than the risk of changing. And once I crossed that bridge, I was running towards change, because a lot of people look at entrepreneurial journeys. So, oh, I can't believe you were willing to take that risk. I'm like, the risk was behind me. Yeah. I was running away from the risk because the risk was here.
Yeah.
It was where I looked ahead. I mean, when I first started contemplating all these ideas, I was mid to late 30s. And I'm looking ahead. I'm thinking to myself, in the environment I was in, I couldn't do that another 30 years. It just emotionally wasn't possible. And so eventually, you've got to make a change.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place for a quick plug, because there are people watching, there might be people that watch this afterwards. The Great Resignation, right? We've heard a lot about this, and a lot of people scratching their heads. I have a theory that it was on its way anyway, and this just accelerated it. But with regard to a couple of things, you're in the software game, I'm in the software game. Everything about our lives is underpinned by software these days, and by knowledge.
For good or ill.
Yeah, for good or ill. And there's a whole lot of people, I would say, probably still sitting in those corporate offices, feeling like you felt, feeling like I felt, not yet taking that leap. And at the same time, we've got a GDP that's been declining for 15 years now, small business starts that have been declining for 15 years. What would you say to the Rich that's still out there slogging away for, let's say, Hewlett Packard or IBM or anyone else, right? Fill in the blank, even a cool AWS, right? But somebody goes to that environment and feels this isn't it either, what message would you carry to that person?
I honestly, and again, my perspective, you're asking me the question. I think we as humans are literally born to be entrepreneurs. I think it is in our very DNA to be entrepreneurial. And I think, for me, just to be clear, and I think this is the opportunity for a lot of your listeners, is you can be entrepreneurial in your current job. And that's what I did. I remember when I made these big changes at Interface Systems, that 6 months after it was clear it was working, one of my programmers came to me and said, "Rich, I can't believe you took this risk. You put everything on the line, your job, your title, your stock options, your authority, your position, your paycheck, everything, you put it on the line." And he said, "I can't even believe you were willing to do that." And of course, then I shared with him the risk of staying the same versus the risk of change equation. And I'm not sure he got it, but the fact matter is that you can try a bunch of new things where you are. And for me, it turned out that I was able to experiment my way to a business idea inside the corporation I was working for. And I'm not sure that I would have even yet done it when I did it. And then all of a sudden, I'm out of work. I lost my job. I went home and told my wife that what had happened, and she looked at me in tears in her eyes, and she said, "You're unemployed?" And I said, "No, honey, I'm an entrepreneur now." And and it took her 6 months to figure out that entrepreneurship actually paid less than unemployment.
I really love that, though. I agree. I tend to agree that we're all born entrepreneurs in the sense that we're all born creators. And entrepreneurship really is about creating. It's about, the pursuit of opportunity, regardless of whether you have the resources to achieve that opportunity, and a certain faith in that knowledge or in that notion, right?
Well, and I can get a room full of people, and it'd probably be the same here. I'll just ask for a show of hands. How many of you, of course, this is going to be an easy test question for this area of the country. How many of you on a snowy day grabbed a snow shovel and went to your neighbors and said, "Can I shovel your driveway?" Right? Yeah. Mowed their lawn, babysat, did a paper. Well, I don't know. Paper routes are still a thing anymore. That was one of my first entrepreneurial ventures. My wife and I came home from church one Sunday, on a snowy Sunday, and we drive up in the driveway, and here's this kid on my porch with a snow shovel in his hand. Not a big deal, but it doesn't happen very often in our neighborhood. And I drive up and asked him, "Hey, what's going on?" He goes, "Would you like me to shovel your driveway?" Okay, I like this idea. I said, "How much do you charge?" He says, "Tell you what, I'll do it, and you pay me what you think it's worth when I'm done." There's an entrepreneur. I'm sure he got twice as much as what he would have gotten had he set his price and asked me, right? And, and I think, for me, it isn't just the creativity, it's the customer relationship. It's wanting to deliver. My definition of joy is serving others with your heart, your hands, and your minds, delighting others, delighting the people you intend to serve. And I think at our core, we are, as human beings, wired to work hard, number one. I don't think anybody's afraid of hard work. Number two, we are wired to work together. We're built to work in community with one another. And number three, we're wired to delight, that our purpose is in serving others. And I think that is the essence of entrepreneurship. Yeah. Work hard, work with others, and delight others.
I think that's absolutely spot on. So why don't we see if there's any questions? I want to make sure there's time. If you're watching virtually, you can ask in the stream as well. Yep. So anybody have any questions for Rich real quick?
It's sometimes said that, like, if you have an inspiring idea or a way you want to see the world, that you first have to succeed before you can pursue that. I'm just curious, in your experience, were there any ideas about Menlo that you had at the beginning but realized wouldn't really be able to work or play out well until you had some amount of success? Like an idea that you knew at the beginning but didn't implement until year 5 or year 10, just because you knew the hurdles.
I think those are still there for me 20 years in. I will say that, classic question we get because of the success we've produced and the amount of work we've done and the success of that work is people look at us and say, why aren't you bigger? And, I have to admit that question burns a hole in my brain. Like, why aren't we bigger? And, I can give you a bunch of excuses, but I think too that I'm sure that we have made a lot of mistakes along the way as well. I'm not unsatisfied where we got as a company, and I have to, recognize that inherent in that question, a lot of times what people will do is they want to ask that question because they're not actually criticizing me for what we've accomplished in our years. They're trying to let themselves off the hook, right? Where they're saying, oh, well, if I was going to do what you're going to do, I'd want to have this happen. And because you haven't had it happen, I guess I won't do it either. And then they've let themselves off the hook. The fact of the matter is, this is the hardest I've ever worked in my life. It's the most I've ever done in any one place in my life. I've been doing this for 20 years now. I've never done anything else for 20 years. I still, here I am, I'm 64. My kids are convinced that they will one day drag a smiling but lifeless 95-year-old out of Menlo. I still have lots of dreams about things I want to accomplish, things that haven't necessarily played out exactly the way I thought they would have, but I'm not giving up on those things either.
Yeah. So you mentioned the crunch and overtime that we're all familiar with in software. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've done at Menlo to combat that, both for your employees and then also for yourself as a founder.
That's a different question, but we'll talk about that.
I know.
Yeah, I'm not writing the software, so I'm not threatening any software projects if I work overtime. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about that too. And I will say that there were moments, especially early on, where I think I gave too much of my life to the business in the first few years. And quite frankly, I look back at it now and I don't think it was necessary. I have at least one of my kids who reminds me every now and then of what she saw in losing her best friend or dad during those early years. And I lament that. But there is, I think the biggest risk for any entrepreneur is you do have to turn it off. You got to protect yourself along the way too. For the people who work for us, the formula is actually almost trivial in terms of avoiding overtime. And it is simply that when you put two people together, so you no longer have this singular tower of knowledge, and then you pull them apart and put them back together in a different combination. So let's say I have a project at Menlo where we have 4 programmers working on the project. Well, with 4 people, you have 3 different combinations of pairs, and we repair them every week. So let's say that 4 has been working on this project for a couple of months. So in those couple of months, they've been building this software and they've been changing the pairs every week. And so now they're 8 weeks into the project and the client says, go faster. Well, we could double the speed of that project by bringing 4 other programmers in, pair them with the original 4. That's where the onboarding is going to occur. Then start changing those pairs around. You got even more combinations with 8. And within just a couple of weeks, we are literally producing twice the output that we were with 40-hour work weeks. No overtime, no weekends. And I think from I'm a baseball fan, obviously. I typed in all the Major League Baseball players back in 1973. Ty Cobb is famous for saying that of all the records he ever set as a Detroit Tiger, there was one that would never be broken. And it was his lifetime batting average of 367. And he's right. It'd probably never be broken. Never has been broken. Not since, like for 100 years, it hasn't been broken. I think the record that will never be broken at Menlo is 20 years of no overtime in the software industry. I don't think that'll ever be broken.
Now you got to benchmark. You got to try and break
That's
that.
right.
25 years. Do we have any online questions at all?
Not yet. I was gonna say that if you did, you could repeat the question if you can, just because you guys have the mic.
Oh,
yes,
right.
absolutely.
Sorry about
yes.
that.
Yep.
Barring any questions, feel free to raise hands if you want. Okay, Matt.
I've got kind of like a couple questions to get into it. One is like, how long have you been in the entrepreneurial space? And for that length, what do you think has been like the biggest fear that always comes up in your mind being in that space?
So how long have you been in the entrepreneurial space, and what's been the biggest fear that comes up in your mind?
Comes up like, as an entrepreneur, you know?
So, yeah, I mean, we started Menlo in 2001. And so I guess the easiest part of that question is it's been about 21 years since I've been in the entrepreneurial space. The primordial fears of an entrepreneur, especially when you got 50 people working for you, is payroll.
Mm.
And, especially payroll when pandemic hits and your revenue sags 60% from one year to the next. Then there's those frightening little moments kind of every, few months or so where, especially in our business, we're project-based business. And much like building homes and that sort of thing, you get a home done, you can't go sell the next home to that customer because they're already got their house, right? You're building custom software. Client comes to us, we build the software for them, we give them the keys to the software, and they're like, thank you. I'm like, great, you want to do another project? No, we're fine, So now you got to go find the next set of customers, right? And that is the plight of a services business, is you're always looking for new customers, and customers never show up exactly when you need them. There's the challenge people worry about where projects show up like this. This one ended, gap, this one begins. Yeah, that's a problem. The bigger problem is when they show up like this or like this, right? And you're like, I always say that a company defines itself by as much by what it chooses to say yes to as what it chooses to say no to. And the corollary to that is the devil always comes carrying cash. And when you're an entrepreneur and you're sitting down at a table and somebody puts a pile of money on the table and you're like, cash. What do you want to do? Cash. And you have to be careful, right? You have to be careful what you sign up for. You have to be careful how you judge the opportunity, because I will tell you, no matter, and there's, our entrepreneurial journey is one of self-funding. So we've never taken out a loan. We've never received any money from anybody. It's all been built on what we've earned ourselves, and then turn our profits into the next stage of growth. That's a slower way to grow. Getting outside money, you can go faster, right? Cash flow is king especially in a services business because of that payroll problem. Well, what I encourage and tell other entrepreneurs, and I'm not saying going and getting outside money is wrong. A lot of very successful companies have done it, but understand anytime anybody hands you cash, customer or investor, it comes with a human hand attached to it. And that hand is attached to an arm, which is attached to a body, which is attached to a person. And you better get to know the person who's giving you that money, because they're going to have expectations that might be different than yours.
That's a really good point. And I think to bring it together with what's happening in I believe anyway, what's happened in society, in our Western society, especially in corporate jobs, is driven by that fact. Because I look at the difference between what you and your company experienced, as I understand it. I don't know the details, but we've talked a little bit with the pandemic. Drops off of revenue 60%. Did you see joy drop off 60%?
Well, in my books, I differentiate between joy and happiness.
Right.
So they're two very different emotions. And so happiness fell off a cliff. Look, when you're a founder of a company, when you're the owner of a company, I have this great responsibility to not only 50 souls that are on the team, but the souls that those souls are connected to.
Yeah.
Right? They have spouses, they have kids, they have responsibilities, they have house payments, all that sort of thing. So, when that happens, and I'll give you the details, I don't mind sharing them. When March 16th of 2020 happened, and it became clear in downtown Ann Arbor, all the restaurants had basically shut down the week before.
Mm-hmm.
Ann Arbor is typically, if you've ever been to Ann Arbor, it's a typical kind of hustling, bustling college town. Can't find a parking place, can't squeeze your way into a restaurant when the students are in session. And the town was a ghost town. You could have played baseball in the middle of any street in downtown Ann Arbor. All the restaurants were closed. No parking spots were taken. It was literally a ghost town. And so we could see, and I got a call from one of our largest customers, one of the largest automotive companies on the planet, where we had just about to complete phase 1 of this terrific 3-phase project. And phases 2 and 3 were going to be the big phases. We're really close to the end of phase 1. And the client calls me up and says, "Hey, Rich, we're doing some adjustments back here. And you guys have 12 billable hours left on phase 1. I said, "Yep, that's right. We need to cut that back to 4. I'm like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, we need you to cut your phase 1 back from, the completion from 12 hours to 4 hours. And oh, by the way, we're going to delay phases 2 and 3. And I'm sitting there with this phone in my ear thinking to myself, one of the largest corporations on the planet is making a phone call to me to cut 8 billable hours. I mean, they're making a phone call to cut maybe a couple $1,000s out of a budget. Yeah. And I looked at my co-founder. I said, "This is the storm of the century." So we gathered the whole team together and we said, "We're cutting your pay to the lowest pay level we got. Founders are going to go to 0. Fortunately, we'd had our best year ever in 2019, so we had a lot of cash in the bank. And we said, we're cutting your hours. Everybody's hourly at Menlo, so not only was the pay rate being cut, but the hours were being cut. And we told them, this is bigger than us. We can't. Yeah. We don't know how bad it's going to get. We don't know how long it's going to last. Now, I will tell you, if you're like me, I had a prediction for the pandemic. It's actually still accurate, at least as far as I can tell. 8 weeks from today, the pandemic will be done. That was my prediction on March 16th of 2020, and is my prediction on whatever today is, March 21st of 2022. 8 weeks from today, the pandemic's going to be done, and that's been my shifting.
You'll be right eventually.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so, and then, thank God PPP loans to the rescue. It's probably the best designed and most quickly executed government program I've ever witnessed, and it actually worked. And when we pushed all that money out to our team members, we brought them up to full pay, full hours, and we pushed it out to them, and we said, guys, do not spend a dime of this if you don't have to. We're going to push it out to you. You go put it in your savings account and keep it there, because again, we don't know how long this is going to last. And but we sagged from 55 people at the height of 2019 to 30 people at the end of 2020. That was painful. It's just a reality.
Yeah.
It's something you have to deal with.
Yeah.
So if you want, I can read that.
Sure. What's the question?
So from Carl Morris says, when did you determine you had succeeded at Menlo, and what led you to continue after that and move on after that? So when did you feel like you succeeded, and what kept you moving after that?
I think you probably hear this one coming. Yeah, I keep hoping for success. There was actually a wonderful moment for me that aligned with a dream I had as a youth when I was a student in Michigan. And I had envisioned this vibrant company working in a big room filled with human energy and camaraderie and doing big inventions and that sort of thing. And one day, probably 30 years later, I walked into Menlo and it was happening. And it hit me that this dream of the 20-year-old had actually
come to pass.
to pass.
Yeah.
And it was a little frightening because it wasn't like I woke up every day and said, okay, how do I get to the dream? It was like I never even thought about it. So I will simply say to all of you that even if you're not feeling like you're hanging on to your dreams, there may be some silent bus driver in the back of your brain that's carefully steering you to that conclusion, because that's what it felt like it happened to me. But in that moment, I realized that I had succeeded. And I had achieved what I had wanted to achieve. And quite frankly, when the pandemic hit, and that was probably the most existential moment of the company's history. And I didn't know if we would survive. And because when it all started, there was no CARES Act. There was no talk of a PPP loan program. There was no talk of increased unemployment in that. So I thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it ends. And I have to admit, in that moment, there were two things probably that one felt very satisfying. I said, okay, I accomplished what I had set out to accomplish. 20 years of doing this, 20 years of staying in business, 20 years of making it through this point. And then once it became clear that survival was not only possible, but we could get to thriving again, that kind of became a new inspirational theme for me. And we set up a 5-step program at Menlo, just inspirational, sort of ideals, which was survive, adapt, sustain, grow stronger, thrive again. And we got through those. We made it all the way back to thriving again. And now it's this moment of what comes next. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of the entrepreneurial journey is hill climbing, and you get up to the top of a hill and you thought you made it, and then you're looking like, oh no, we're just still in the foothills. There's another, and you actually can't see where you're going. Each time you climb a hill, you can see there's another peak to climb when you get there, and there might be a little bit of a drop before you get there. And I just find that at this point, 20 years in, an odd sort of fun.
Yep. No, I think everyone here would probably agree with that. And that's, you've made some really good points here today. I know I'm going to be responsible with your time. You made some really good points, some that I would encourage all of us to focus in on. Of course, the notion of bootstrapping, being able to self-fund when you can. There's a lot of focus right now on entrepreneurship means highly leveraged VC relationships. And that can be fraught with a lot of challenge, but it can also be the only way to get your enterprise off the ground. And so, being able to strike a balance between how are we going to make money and how are we going to make money while keeping our values, because you could easily, probably at some point along your journey, could have gone all to hell with it. It would be a lot easier if I just had one program or one body, but you stuck with that because you knew something inside of you was driving you, that you needed that for joy, you needed that for quality, you needed that for, so, having some faith in your vision and in your purpose, along with being able to maintain financial control as much as you can, so that you don't find yourself in that position where you're being pressured. During that same period you were going through, what you did in the pandemic, we had a software contract which was set to make our entire business. But by the end of that year, we didn't have that contract anymore, because at that software company, which was a global company who was completely re-engineering their platform, they had to cut everybody's salaries as well. And there were private equity involved, and there were some other unpleasantries that were happening. They were firing people. So morale went really, really in the toilet. And being able to address that difficult time from the standpoint of, at least you were in a culture where the people knew you cared. They knew you were up against the wall. Yes, joy probably went down for a little while, but I would imagine that the enthusiasm for Menlo was still there. Whereas what I saw at this other customer was the enthusiasm went straight out the window. People were jumping ship. They were feeling very, they were already demoralized, because by the time private equity came in and screwed up their whole organizational dynamic, and they tried to fix it by bringing in other people, and that just made it worse. And then they brought in a hatchet man, and pretty soon the culture had turned toxic. And, we have to watch out for that sort of thing as founders, because we don't realize, we're going to learn that lesson along the way, maybe, or maybe not, maybe we'll avoid it. But, a lot of those things that you've covered, I think, really apply to us here. And maybe if you could close with, we're a community that's a little bit different than, say, in Ann Arbor, certainly in Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas. And I think most of the people in this room and on our listener audience are people who are not really motivated by, hey, I want to be a billionaire, right? Or I want to make a scalable product. It's, I want to solve a problem or improve the world in some way. But we're doing it in a really tough place. Marquette, Michigan is not an easy place to start something. Right. So I guess, what thoughts might you have on being resilient and following that, continuing to follow that call, despite being in an area where maybe it's harder than the average geography to start something?
Well, I will say that if you believe there's anywhere where this is easy, I've yet to find it, right? It's easy to pick up the magazines. I'll tell you, my industry, the software industry, I'll be challenged by people who are like, well, I can't believe this is going to take so long. I mean, there were a couple of guys in an apartment in Stanford who wired a few computers together and they built Google. And I think within 3 months they were trillionaires. Well, it's not true. I mean, go really read the Jeff Bezos story and how long it took him and how many existential crises there were in Amazon before he became Jeff Bezos the way we know him now. The fact matter is, it's, if you're afraid of hard work, you should, don't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the challenges can be exciting.
Mm.
It's just a reality. And, I think the hardest part of being an entrepreneur is the patience and the persistence. I often refer to entrepreneurship as this impatient patience. We're always waiting for something. We're waiting for a phone call. We're waiting for an email to come in. We're waiting for a contract to be signed. We're waiting for a deal to come through. We're waiting for somebody to make a positive decision about something they're going to do with us. And it never goes as fast as you want. It never always goes the way you want it. And so then you have to figure it out. And entrepreneurship is much about creating viable plan Bs and Cs, even though you're like myopically focused on plan A, and just being, having that agility to be able to adapt when they come up. And, I tell people now I'm unemployable, right? I am so used to being out in the forest on my own, rubbing sticks together to produce fire, turning over rocks to see if the bugs under there are filled with protein. And I just like it that way. Mm-hmm. You feel, I will say, oddly, you feel more in control in that environment than you do in the political environments that probably you and I both worked in.
Yeah.
Where there was people off in a conference room somewhere grinding their knives at some point.
Making decisions that they would hand to you, right?
That I had, that were, A, didn't make sense, and B, we're personally motivated rather than what we're trying to do is satisfy a customer. And I will say, in terms of where your money comes from, the careful act in getting money into your business, because that is the lifeblood, right? That's the oxygen in the room, is if you consider the basic definition of a customer is you say something to someone and because of what you said, they give you money, right? That's like the basic notion of a customer. Yeah. Well, if you pitch your company to investors and they give you money, you think of them as investors, but in fact, they are your customer, right? What they're paying, the reason they're giving you money is because they believe their money is going to turn into more money later and they will get it back. And so, in fact, if all you're spending your time doing is pitching to investors, you're actually not building a company.
Right.
right? And I would just say, hone your skills on building relationships with customers. People will give you money for the services you provide. In the investment circles, that's called non-dilutive funding. It's like, customers are going to piece your business because you're selling them a product or a service that you're trying to do. And the only reason you should need outside venture capital is if the product you're trying to build requires so much investment, you couldn't get to customer number one without the outside investment. And again, there are many worthy companies that have done that. So I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do, but understand as soon as you take outside investment, somebody just hit a stopwatch on your business. And that tick, 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 tick sound is when they expect their return to come back. And that probably means at some point you lose control over the thing you're trying to create. And, personally, I didn't want that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's very important. And first, I thank you once again for your time. I thank you for what you've done with your company, because for me anyway, one of the things that I most admire about you and about Menlo is I believe that corporations are part of the challenge that we're feeling in our society. The way corporations behave and the fundamental singular focus on shareholder return is what is driving a lot of the biggest problems in our country and in the world. And you have done something different with the corporation. You've executed within those boundaries. You've played by those rules, but you've delivered a different experience for your customer, for yourself, for your community, and for your people. So that's, I think, a tremendous success. And I hope that a lot more companies follow suit. We're certainly trying to do that a lot here and be a voice of that kind of thing. And I think there's a tide change coming that hopefully will bring us to a brighter place. So thank you again, Rich, for your time. Any final questions, or can we just give Rich, all right, let's do a round of applause. Thank you very much.